the individual parts that can.
Gameplay.
The environment.
Environment, what kinds of gameplay?
Mechanics, like what a player can do.
Sure. You have any? Fair enough.
Items introduction.
Say again?
Items introduction.
Items introduction, yeah. I mean, both the way the items are presented and the items themselves, absolutely. Characters, huge one. What parts of characters? Their character development, yeah, their character arc. What else?
Dialogues.
The dialogue, the things they actually say.
Design.
How they look.
They're kind of like social attributes like race, gender.
Sure, absolutely. Which is part of their design, and also their social relationships. The way that they react to each other can often tell a lot about the game world. So, Smarty Pants over there giving away. Yeah, this is the Heider-Simmel animation. If you are not familiar, back in 1944, neuropsychologists Marianne Simmel and Fritz Heider, as you can tell, I worked with Andreas in Germany, they published an experimental study of apparent behavior in the American Journal of Psychology. This is a stop motion animation. It was done through like cardboard and glass and photos. And the movement of these shapes and of the little door opening or closing is entirely randomly generated by kind of a proto-AI. It was math. Math is the only thing that's doing anything about this. So I want you to look at this for a couple of seconds, and what's your initial reaction to this, just looking at this?
First thing you want to do is like project a story onto it.
That was what their whole study is that the first thing we do as humans is assign these guys backstories, motivations, little trajectories. We get emotionally invested. It's a study that was that was instrumental in talking about how humans are kind of inherent storytellers. This is one of the things that the robots are never going to probably do as well as we do. Probably, you know how to say it, but until we have true and real AI, humans constantly assign stories to, and we look for patterns to random shapes on a screen, to weather patterns, to anything like that. If you look at the YouTube comments on this, you know, the animation is on YouTube, and it's just comment after comment about being like, no, you're wrong. It's the kitchen scene from Jurassic Park. No, you're wrong. It's the abusive boyfriend coming home and being thrown out by the dad. You know, this sort of thing. The reason I am going on about this animation is that in a way, this could be one of the simplest games. You know, what it looks like, how it plays, how it feels. It's sort of Pong era kind of graphics, right? And the point is that the whole game, whatever you do, is going to tell a story, with you or without you. So, you know, every single part of it, every feature set, and the whole point of it is that you need to own that and you need to be aware of it. The ways that games fall down a lot, in review scores, in critical reception, in the just general way that they are consumed and then are considered failures, is because bits of them don't match. The narrative falls down. The narrative is incomplete. But a lot of times it's the bits of the narrative that the game dev team did not realize they were telling. And so that's what I'm like, look, every single part of it, I don't know why the screen is a little squishy, that's all right. Every single part of it, your combat system needs to be telling the same story as the cutscenes, but also as the music choice, the music bed. You know, if things get dramatic and there's no dramatic gameplay to back it up, gamers are going to play your game and feel weird about it and not know why, and it's going to translate to a bad review score, but not really good actionable feedback. So, narrative design in general. It started out kind of as a mix of game design and game writing and cinematics design. There wasn't really such a thing as narrative design until not that long ago. I mean, it's a young industry, but even for a young industry, this is a young discipline. And the thing is that narrative design, the whole point of it is to tell those stories intentionally, is to make sure that every part of the game is telling the same story. So, It's grown beyond the sum of its parts though, because narrative design isn't just game design plus game writing, or even plus cinematics design. It includes both, or all three really. You do need to have some writing chops in that, like, if you don't love language, if you don't kind of want to wallow around in words and revel in the way that language can be used, you don't have to have perfect grammar or spelling. I mean, it would help, obviously, but you need to enjoy the way that words can be used to tell a story, to reinforce your point, to make your point in the first place, to convince people. So if you're not like into words at all, maybe narrative design is probably not your specialization that you want to do, but the thing about narrative design is that we don't just help create the story that the team wants to tell in the way that writers, for example, do, but then we help the whole game tell it. So does every game need a narrative designer? No. However, every good game has had at least one member of their team who has acted as a narrative designer, maybe temporarily, and whether or not they knew they were, but sooner or later somebody has looked at the whole thing as a holistic experience, has looked at what the whole game is doing together, and looked at what stories each part of the game was telling. So what the hell do we do daily? This is one of the things, I'll get to that in a second. Of course, there's no one answer to what do I do for a living, because it depends so much on project, company, genre, country you're in. I want to leave as much time as I can for questions at the end, so if you think of some, do bring them up. But in general, so some things I have done, this is not every narrative design job, and I've sometimes been doing it as a game content designer, a game experience designer, just a plain old game designer, game writer, any number of titles. As you have probably realized by now, game designer is this monstrous octopus-like catch-all that can be defined by any number of skill sets and subsets, again, depending on genre and country and all the rest of it. So, I've written scripts, obviously, cinematic scripts, dialogue, plain voiceover, all the rest of it. I've worked to get those in the game and implemented through dialogue database systems, through game editors, through game engines, that sort of thing. My coding skills are for shit, frankly. So if you are not much of a coder, but you would like to be paid to tell stories, this might be one of the things that you might want to look into. I saw that. So yeah, I've done a lot of writing. I mean, every freaking item in a game needs to be named, and it needs a description. It needs something that will be player facing, and the way that you talk about things, inanimate objects, sells the world just as much as the way that they look or how they sound. A lot of high-level stuff, setting, world building, setting design, world design, that sort of thing, and then all the way down more granular to character design. A lot of the older characters from games in like the 90s and noughties, let's say, you look at the character and you're like, that's a very cool design. Obviously some, it's a silhouette I can recognize from a distance. Obviously a lot of intentionality has gone into this, except that I don't know shit about them from just looking at them. And that's something that is changing now as fashion has become less of a dirty word among the game designers, and they realize it doesn't mean that we necessarily want our characters to be trendy, but we want our characters to have gotten up and chosen their clothing in the morning the same way any of us get up and choose our clothes in the morning, which is how do I want to feel today, what's the weather like, and what do I need to be at and be dressed appropriately to do. So new character designs, a lot of them, I do a lot of consultation with concept artists or character artists to figure out, okay, well, if this person used to be in the military, are they the sort of person who is like super moto and they have a high and tight haircut and they're like really like gung-ho, or are they holding all of that past, at arm's length, and are they going to grow their hair out and they're going to have a shaggy beard? Every little decision should tell the same story from, throughout the game. Voiceover, lots of script writing, yes, but also I do a lot of directing of voiceover, so getting into a recording booth, being able to speak to actors in their own language. If you are into that, can I recommend that you, for funsies or outside of school, take a theater class or do some amateur dramatics or anything like that, because just the ability to realize that talking for a while is a strain on somebody's voice. So what kind of breaks are appropriate to build into your directing session? You know, it gets that kind of granular. The nice thing about narrative in general is that it is incredibly and intensely cross-functional. It's a discipline that can and will touch, appropriately, as many disciplines as you let it. Any experience you have, any hobbies you have, any other degrees, or you know, if you changed your mind and did a different degree halfway through your course of study, any of that is going to work for you in narrative design, not against you. Anything that you can bring to the table is going to be like actually helpful. I have gotten paid for knowing what the difference is between, you know, a billhook and a glaive. I had a degree in pre-gunpowder history. Like my parents were like, oh, she's staying in the basement forever. Like this is not marketable. I have a degree in that and creative writing, just fending off the job offers with a stick there. But I took a Tolkien class in university because word nerd. And a dude I used to LARP with, massive nerd, used to, you know, it was like, hey, didn't you take a Tolkien class? I was like, yeah. He was like, you should come do QA for us. We're doing Lord of the Rings online, and they need a lore monkey. They need somebody to like just double check the lore as they go as a final line of defense, because the Tolkien IP is very protective. Estate rather is very protective of their IP. So, you know, I mean, that's randomly kind of how I got into games, but, and I'm not saying that that's certainly not a one-size-fits-all solution. Everybody calls and signs up for a Tolkien class, but every little thing that I've learned, and every bit of reading that I do, you know, outside nonfiction or fiction, has been incredibly helpful. So all of those things. Of course, we do a lot of very standard game design stuff, which is feature designs, feature implementation, bug fixing, you know, scripting. Again, as much coding as you have, they will use it. There's a new subset of this subset discipline called technical narrative designer, in fact, which is people who are very good with engines and editors and databases, and are, you know, have decent scripting skills and decent coding skills, because especially in AAA, but also in like branching narrative mobile games, that sort of thing, there's a lot of call for a fair number of like quite technical issues. But if you have an eye for story, or you know, a sort of storytelling bent, you can do that job much better than a standard programmer or coder who's like, I don't know, it works, and you're like, yeah, but it makes no sense. Never mind. You know, so yes, technical narrative designer also an option. Live event design, monetization. I had a job in Germany, in fact, that I had to learn how to monetize a game on the fly, because I was in charge of the item store, so that was a bit of a crash course. And a lot of it, you know, they were like, we'll start out by doing the item names and things for the store, and then it ended up being like, and now you have to set the prices. I'm like, I do words, I don't do numbers. This is not a good, okay, I'll just do that then. So, you know, you sort of learn on the job. Ad copy in general, writing ad copy for anything player facing, for stores, for websites, character backgrounds, world building stuff, but also like, hey, please play our game during this event and, you know, give us the monies. If you work for a small company, marketing and monetization and that sort of thing might kind of be one of the hats you have to wear, because small companies, indie, they value people who can code switch and who can play, you know, perform a lot of roles. So for whatever reason, marketing ends up being the domain of narrative designers. So I left this up on the screen for a while. Ludonarrative dissonance. You've all come across it, and I'm going to harp on this for just a minute, if you'll bear with me, because it's the thing that people don't know is the reason that they didn't like your game, is a lot of it. Ludo, from Latin to play, ludare, story, and dissonance, nomachi, yes. If you have an awesome sci-fi heads-up display, awesome sci-fi HUD, and your game involves like archers and dragons, I mean, these are extreme examples, but like that is a pretty standard example of ludonarrative dissonance. If you have epic, awesome music, and there's cymbal crashes and there's things going on, and it's actually during like a really boring crafting gameplay section, also, you know, that's ludonarrative dissonance. People don't realize that because they made an awesome soundtrack or an awesome piece of music, and they want to put it in, it might not be the right thing, even if it is objectively awesome, because this bit and that bit cannot be in the same game together. There's a thing that theater, shoot, I can't remember who was being interviewed about this, but it was talking about how to succeed as a director in theater productions, and how to succeed as an actor in theater productions. And he said, well, you just have to make sure you're in the same play. And it sounded glib, but when you look at it, if actor number one thinks that this interpretation of the play is heartfelt and slow and subtle and dramatic, and actor number two is like, but I've got this hilarious bit of business that I'm gonna be like juggling a thing and then I'm gonna put a feather on my head, they're not in the same play. Even though they're both saying the correct lines, even though they've both got very honest and real interpretations of their characters. This is basically what narrative design is about. Whether it's from a narrative designer or somebody who is interested in the narrative or who has been stuck with it because they lost the coin toss, they are about preventing ludonarrative dissonance and making the whole game tell the same story. So if you are kind of into this, there's three main things really for how to get into narrative design. I'm not going to go on this for too long because it might not apply to all of you, but I'll have to take questions about it. The first and most important, and this is how to get it, this is an important part of how to get into any kind of game design, whatever specialization it is. Consume games critically, all right? Don't just play them for fun. Play them on different platforms, play them in different genres, play the kinds of games you don't like, and figure out why other people like them. In narrative's case, focus on what stories they're telling. Are they telling them by accident or on purpose? How are they telling them? What reinforces the storytelling? Is it atmospheric and moody? Is the music telling the same story? But you know, take it seriously, take notes. Nobody will pay you to tell stories in games if you can't explain how games tell stories. And that's the same thing, I think, for any kind of design. Nobody's going to pay you to create systems for their games if you can't explain how that system moves that game forward, moves that game's story forward, and moves the player experience forward. Anyway, step number 2 is learn your stuff. This is both beforehand and on the job. So do your research. Look for blogs, look for articles, look for highly reviewed games, and then find out who was the lead designer on those, who was the narrative designer on that, who directed their cinematics. Look if they've written any blog articles, you know, look for the stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of talks. I don't know if you guys have access to the GDC Vault, if like there's a...
Interesting, we just come out of the meeting where we're trying to get the guys access to the full vault.
Nice.
Get a license.
If you can, even if you can just borrow somebody's login, you're not supposed to, but if you can, like, take advantage of that. That is something that is expensive once you are out of school, and is something that most students don't take as much advantage of as they could while they can, and then leave and go, oh, there's like 50 hours of friggin' programming I would have liked to get to over the summer or something. It's worth it. People have been thinking about this and talking about this and giving very good curated presentations about it for 10, 15 years, and it's worth looking into. And ask. Find, there's plenty of people who are more sort of public narrative authorities. You can find them on Twitter, you can find them in blogs. Again, it's all about sort of looking for it for yourself and researching them. Ask polite questions, ask for informational interviews. If you don't know what that is, that means like, hi, can I get 20 minutes on your calendar, half an hour, and can I take you out to coffee if you're local or something? It's like, yes, I'm buying, and I recognize that this is your time that I'm asking for, but I'm not looking for a job from you, I'm not looking to get something out of you, I just have a prepared list of intelligent questions, not the basics. You don't want to like do this and have them be like, I could Google that for you, but you're kind of being a jerk right now. But come in with some real questions that apply to how you make games, the kinds of games you want to make, the kinds of games you're making now, the kinds of games you play. So yeah, read, watch, and ask. And last but not least, do not apply to a game narrative position the same way that you would apply to a standard game design or a game writer position. Many writers who work in the industry are outsourced and often are wrangled by somebody like me, like a narrative designer. I wrangle 2 outsourced writers at the moment who are, God help me, in Canada. So time zones are awesome. But in the same way that you would not submit a game design portfolio for a game writer job and vice versa, you shouldn't submit a game writer portfolio or a game design portfolio for a narrative design job. In terms of what exactly goes into it, I'm going to cheat sheet that the slides from the talk I gave at GDC this year, which a lot of it was concentrating on how to make a portfolio for narrative design, are up on dreadpiratecon.com, so feel free to help yourself if you want them. But yeah, otherwise I can also happily take questions. Right. And kind of in conclusion here, yeah, you should care about game narrative even if you are not a storyteller, even if you're not intending to do this as a career, just so that you realize when it's happening. Game narrative is something that's going to happen with or without you, so use it intentionally and recognize when it is happening in your game. Narrative design is the art of using a game to tell a story. Writers use words to tell a story, we use a game. And most of our job, like the job of most designers, is it's like 1% having an idea and like 90% just dragging people by the ear into meeting rooms and being like, talk to each other. You guys are making things that touch on the same feature. For God's sake, stop contradicting each other's work, you know? And you can become a narrative designer if you want to and get paid to tell stories, and that's pretty cool, so that's all right. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions. Do you have any?
Do you think that it's possible to have like entry-level narrative design jobs, or is it more pragmatic to try and join a company or in the industry as say web designer or something else, and then shift and move into narrative design?
So there are some rare, beautiful little unicorns out there, junior narrative design positions, assistant, associate narrative design, but even those are probably going to want you to have not necessarily experience, but be able to prove, preferably through a portfolio, for example, that you understand what the hell you're talking about, that you understand game narrative, that you have decent design chops as well as writing chops. You have to have some decent writing samples, and also prove that you can write a design document, communicate with artists. They don't like to read, so you can't just give them like, here's the character's entire background and how they feel about their dad. It's like, they don't care. They want a paragraph that says, this is roughly what this character should look like and why. That's it, you know. They want reference art. You'll have 6 pages of reference art and 2 paragraphs, you know. So yeah, anything that can prove that shows that you can prove it. So it can happen. It is going to be rarer, obviously. Narrative is one of these things that is like any specialization. You know, the really specialized titles are going to be in AAA usually, or in very, very big companies, often with a centralized pool, like a support pool of, you know, one for QA and one for localization and one for narrative and that sort of thing. That said, as I hope I've proven, it's something that people do anyway, you know? There will be like the designated story dude or the designated narrative chick, and she's going to, you know, be a game designer or cinematics director, you know, cinematics designer, or, you know, sometimes it's higher up. But yeah, so it is a specialization you want to move into, usually. Like I said, a few unicorns. Go ahead.
Are there any games that really impressed you in terms of narrative design? That would be good for us maybe to deconstruct just how it was.
Good question. So this is super subjective, and there are, you know, obviously there's no right answers. I would say that for the crash course, for the like short thing that you can play and grok like pretty quickly, Papers, Please came out a few years ago, and it, you know, won all of the awards and that sort of thing. That's won 80 Days. The mobile branching game is very impressive because it manages to be replayable, which is not super usual for a narrative heavy game. I mean, all the sort of standards, your big sort of Ubisoft kind of things, and your Life is Strange and all of that sort of thing. You know, yes, if you want to see a grand story played out, that's great. For the scriptwriters, in fact, one of the things that drives both scriptwriters and game designers batty is when a scriptwriter is hired for a game and they produce a script for a TV show or a movie, you know, and they give it to the game designers and they go, this is an open world game. Like, we cannot depend on on players being able to experience things in an order, because games are often nonlinear. So if you are interested in writing for games, that is the best thing that you can bring to the table in terms of your portfolio, in terms of your sort of how you sell yourself, is being like, here is a really short script for 4 different encounters that could happen in any order and yet tell the same like rough story or something like that. Just prove that you can understand non-linear. Yeah.
Sorry, would you mind if I?
Sure.
So on that, so because obviously we don't really understand things from the start of the process. So how much material would someone need to pitch? Obviously they have to know the story and the characters, but how much further does it have to go? Do you have to know what the mechanics
to
are?
become a writer on an existing project?
No, to pitch your own. So to
Oh.
generate a project, what do you need to have? Do you need to have a small build of, of like, no.
A solid pitch deck and a good elevator pitch is really what it is. So literally a PowerPoint presentation is enough to pitch a game.
Right.
The thing about pitching a game is that it needs to start from the gameplay. Unless it's sort of a Twine game or Twine and Inkle and these sorts of things are open source little branching narrative editors. So if you are interested in this, Twine is a really good place to start if you aren't already playing around with it. You might want to. And so is Inkle. So the problem with ideas is that in the game industry, literally everyone has them. It's a question of selling an idea that's going to work with a bunch of things. So in your case, let's say you have an awesome story idea. You would want to work with a game designer or something, unless you have the idea for the mechanics as well. How does that mechanic support your story? If the core loop of the game isn't fun, it doesn't matter how good the story is, which is one reason that I think narrative designers do fairly well. Like the minute a team or a company gets one, they realize they need 6 more. Is the nice sort of side effect. And a lot of that is about, okay, your core mechanic is shooting people, and that's really fun. You've got it tuned so that the weapons feel good, the movement feels good, the combat feels really good. This cutscene shows a man, this is an exaggeration, but this cutscene shows a man who bursts into a room and is told, you now have the power of life or death over this man in the electric chair. Do you throw this switch? And then goes on for 5 minutes about how hard this decision is for them to make. And it's like, I mowed down 35 dudes to get here. That is major ludonarrative dissonance, and that's what happens a lot when you get a setting or a story pitched without a game as part of it. So in other words, if you want to pitch a story, think also about what kind of mechanics would reinforce that. And if you don't have the design sort of sorted out yourself, get game design to be part of that pitch. Otherwise, it will kind of fall flat. Because everybody who's been in the industry for more than about a minute has heard 1,000, it's pirates, but in space. Sure, what's the game? But it's pirates in space. And they're steampunk. It's like, okay, but what is the game? It's like a really cool idea or a really good setting or a character. And it's just like, yeah, but that's not a game. That's a painting. It's a vignette. That's a cartoon possibly, or a TV episode. But it's not a game. And if it's how do pirates, I don't know. Now I have to pitch a game. Fuck. If it's all about pirate ship combat in space, if it's all about a pirate who's decided he no longer wants to be a pirate, what game mechanics can reinforce that? That's the sort of thing that you have to be able to work out and sell in order to pitch a game. And for that, all you need is a charismatic speaker and a PowerPoint deck.
Yeah, just how does it work with sort of testing, in terms of testing the narrative? Would it come under kind of UX, user experience testing? How do you test a narrative during the development phase?
So, the thing about narrative is it is very cheap to make at the beginning, and it is very expensive to change at the end. Stories, sooner or later, are ideas. They're just words, and you can put words down on paper as much as you like. The minute that starts getting baked into gameplay, into cinematic cutscenes, into recorded voiceover. In other words, the story should have been thoroughly tested before it gets that far. That if there are still plot holes, and believe me, I've worked on plenty of projects where it's like, hey, we're 5 minutes from alpha, that's a plot hole you could drive a truck through, and everybody just has to go with it and be like, I hope the players don't notice, because it is kind of too late. And that's the thing that preferably you have a narrative designer on hand to prevent. So yes, the stories should be tested while they're still in the brainstorming phase. A lot of my job actually ends up being conducting brainstorms, because that's not something that comes naturally to everybody, and I'm a bit sort of extroverted, so I'm okay with that, you know. But while it's still in the brainstorming phases, you know, you have to do the whole, like, the 5-year-old test. Like, if my 5-year-old cousin can see a way that the villain could win if he just kills the guy early enough, that's a fail, you know. Back to the drawing board, have to fix that. It has to go through that kind of testing. When it comes to actually implemented, it's a QA, UI, UX, but also a design test thing, audio as well. So you need to make sure VO, you know, you need to make sure your audio is leveled and is playing nicely with the music, and, you know, is playing nicely with the explosions or the grenades or the gunfire or whatever else, that you can hear what you're meant to hear, that your subtitles have been spell checked, that your, you know, your database is ready for localization, so that you can hand that off if your game does well and it can be translated into something else. The more experiential types of narrative. So, for example, Lord of the Rings Online, I was a junior content designer, and I was working on making little dungeons and instances and things, which was like, I would sort of roughly sketch out a level or explain what I wanted, give it to a level designer. They would make a dungeon out of it. I would use the editor. And I had, you know, your narrative has to be not so tight that it has no wiggle room. So I knew the beats that I wanted to hit, but I wasn't super committed to they must happen in this order with 1 minute break between them or whatever. So, you know, the characters have to act in character at all times, and that's something that is very, like, legitimate for a tester to point out. For QA or something to be like, yeah, every other time that they encounter this character, they're angry, but for whatever reason, this time they're happy, and you're like, oh, that's left over from an old script, I hate everything, we have to go re-record it. So, you know, or whatever. I don't think that actually has happened, but you get the idea. So yeah, when it comes to implemented narrative, that is tested basically the same way that any game is tested. But when it comes to, like, troubleshooting the narrative, my recommendation is get as many people's eyes on it as possible. And the thing about words, so it's not like art where you can see the brushstrokes that went into a painting. You can see the effort, you can see the talent. It's hard to say, if you don't have art training, oh, I could do that, unless it's like Pollock maybe, but, you know. With words, everybody, more or less, in the Western world can write. You can put words on paper. And writing, they say that writing is mostly rewriting. I think it's actually mostly crying, but then also rewriting. Talent counts for something. Talent obviously counts for something, but editing counts for a lot more. Revision and editing is where you get really good writing from, is going over these words over and over, really sort of filing off the rough edges and making very deliberate choices with every word you pick that is going to be heard or read by a player. That work is invisible. Nobody sees the crying and the rewriting and the editing and the, oh God, you know, and the self-doubt and all the rest of it, but they see this final thing and they go, it's a sentence, I can write a sentence, no problem. So the thing about narrative is everybody thinks they can do it, more or less, you know. If you shop it around, you will get opinions from absolutely everyone. And people will be like, wouldn't it be great if, you know, so-and-so did that instead? And you're like, yes, but it contradicts the third act, so get out of my face, you know. But with the caveat, therefore, that when you shop something around, you will get a lot of opinions from people that you're kind of like, stop trying to do my job, stop trying to write my stories. You will also get a lot of good, like, hey, this is a plot hole. Hey, that person is inconsistent. Hey, this characterization could use some work. If he doesn't understand it, maybe I should go back to the drawing board and figure that out. So workshop the hell out of your narrative at the beginning, and then commit to it. That is also really important. Sooner or later, you have to stop rewriting. You can tweak sentences if they're just written. If they're scripted, maybe don't. I mean, if they're recorded, if they're VO. You can tweak some things, but in general, your main narrative, your main plot arc, your character development, all of that should be really kind of nailed down as soon as it can be. It should inform all of the art decisions. It should inform the art style. It should inform the music style. It should inform UI design. It should inform the gameplay as well, you know, and be informed by the gameplay. I'm a big fan of, like, not saying that narrative is king and gameplay is not, or that gameplay is king and narrative is not. I really do think that they need to reinforce each other all the time. So yeah.
Yes. My question is, when you start writing the story, my question is, do you start by giving a context of the world or a time period or something, or we're making a game, we have this gameplay and that's the main character, and you build a story for him, and then a whole story that rotates around him? How do you?
I think that how you design is so personal, and you know it changes so much. I don't think that there is one right way to do that, even on the team level. I think that narrative pillars, in the same way that game design pillars, you know, the sort of 3 or 4 elevator pitch type sentences are important. We want this narrative to make the player rethink how they see immigrants. And we also want the narrative to be consistently funny and make the player laugh. And we want the narrative to sell this idea of a post-apocalyptic dystopian world. Those are your pillars. You know, every decision you make should relate to those. However, those aren't story beats, they're not settings, you know, they're not character design. How you do that is very much up to you. I write the way that I write, and other people start from a setting and build that out first. Some people start from a character and say, in what world does this character make sense? Some people will start from the gameplay, and I do believe that, again, the gameplay needs to come in quite early on in the process. You need to be very clear on what the sort of core loop is of this game, what the gameplay is going to make the player feel, and make sure that doesn't contradict whatever story you want to tell. If you want to tell a heart-wrenching tale of loss, and your gameplay is exuberant gore, you know, that's just not going to work. You should probably shelve the heartbreaking tale of loss till later, and do something that is about, I don't know, psychopathy and revenge, or is about, yeah, in whatever way. So I can't, yeah, that's a very personal thing of how do you write, like, how do you draw? Some people start with color studies, and some people start with sketches, and some people start with, you know, just sitting down and thinking for a while, so, yeah.
So you mentioned that we should nail down the story pretty early in the in the development process, but how would that work in an agile development setting?
It's easiest to think of it as the main story is not every word that is written, is not every line that is spoken. You know, the main story should be nailed down, even, you know, in an agile process. Agile works best, creativity in general, I think, works best when it goes within constraints. You know, if you say, okay, you have a minute to like tell the story, then you're gonna really cut it down to the essential bits of it, that every word, every gesture, every art choice is going to sell that scene. In the same way, if you were doing agile development, like, yeah, you might need to rearrange things, you know, you might say, oh God, this scene is just gonna have to come before that scene or whatever, but most of the main details, they should be locked out.
So tone, world, setting.
Yeah, in the same way, it really is about sort of pillars, you know. People don't do well, hold on, I'm just gonna go back to the first one because that's kind of fun. People don't do very well when they are given infinite space.
Yeah.
And if the story could change at any minute, I've actually been working on a project, I worked on a project in which that has been the bugbear that has damn near, you know, it had damn near destroyed the team. Like, and a lot of that was that this story, including major beats, including like characterization and that sort of thing, was being changed on us over and over throughout the process, and nobody could commit to decisions. Because if this character design is supposed to reinforce that there are civilian fighters who are awesome, and then halfway through development that is no longer a part of the story, you've got a lot of wasted work. You know, in other words, it needs to be part of the constraints within which your project is made. Within, you know, it has to be sort of sorted out and nailed down as early as possible. And again, story is cheap at the beginning. Take the time, you know, schedule it in, have a longer pre-production if you need one. Get consultants in if you're gonna do it, you know, it's like, oh, hey, I want to write for a gay, black, trans, you know, woman character, and I'm not gay, black, trans, woman. I'll get somebody's opinion for an afternoon, get them to troubleshoot some of my basic concepts, and then maybe later on, maybe troubleshoot the dialogue or something. And that is a lot cheaper than making changes right at the end and being like, oh, this character is deeply offensive and I didn't mean it to be, you know, that sort of thing. Yes.
How do you sort of keep a narrative engaging, keep sort of attention when players get to that point where they're sort of omnipotent and they've sort of gathered all the things and, you know, for example, I don't think I've ever finished a Far Cry game because I get to the point where I've got all the stuff and the story isn't really dragging me along. How do you kind of keep that momentum going?
I mean, it depends so much on what the genre is and what your mechanics will allow you to do, but I would counter your Far Cry with Skyrim.
Yeah.
Where, you know, okay, cool, you're at level 100 destruction spells, you can incinerate a dragon by looking at it funny. People are still playing it and still enjoying the story.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later, and this is more of a personal thing, to me, story is all about, is there a character that I can love or hate, or relate to, or identify with, or love to hate, and do I care what happens to them? Even if it's only a side character every once in a while, even if that character is you, preferably if that character is you. You know, in a game, you could be that character, you're the protagonist. Make the player care about what happens to them, and then even if they are omnipotent and omniscient, maybe, like, they are going to be able to still want to see what happens next, and want to see what that character would feel.
I have an idea about that, and I wanted to run it by you. The way Skyrim does this in a very interesting way, it does constant callbacks. You are an omnipotent god, but every character knows it. I don't know. I don't believe Far Cry does that. Like as much gods in Skyrim who will call you, oh, you're the Archmage. Oh, you're the leader of the Fighters Guild, and so on and so on. So I think constant callbacks are an interesting way of like keeping the player to make him feel like his actions matter.
But like this completely failed in World of Warcraft. Like people were heroes, not heroes, just normal foot soldiers at the beginning, and everyone was so into the story. Everyone was so into the narrative. But I mean, a couple of years later, everyone became heroes. Everyone became so distinguished in the world that I mean, none of it mattered. Even though it mattered in the world, in the real life, none of it mattered because I mean, you didn't pull any weight.
Are you talking about World of Warcraft or Warcraft?
No, World of Warcraft. Think about it. At the beginning.
No, it's a common MMO problem, absolutely. And a lot of that is about like, oh, blah blah, champion, and it's just like I have a stick, I have a sharp stick, and like a pot on my head. And then later on, they're still going, oh, champion, and you're like, I'm a literal god among men. Maybe get it together. So there's a couple of things I want to like answer all of them, but there's a couple of things there. Player agency is huge. The more a player feels like they are making decisions that change the world, the more engaged they're going to be. WoW has an issue with that because there are very few major changes they can make to the world. Something like EVE Online, they're nobodies. They're just random spaceship pilots going through the infinite black, but boy can they change the world because there is actual, you know, the systems are in place to allow for that. You get something like Lord of the Rings Online, where they have this real issue because Lord of the Rings is kind of well known, and it's a story about some kind of distinct characters, and those are the characters. No, you can't play a wizard. There are 9 of them. You are not one of them. There's 100,000 of you, exactly. You know, so the way that they got around that, or the way that we got around that, was to make you fellowship adjacent, but not part of the fellowship. So one of the cool things you got to do for the fans of the IP is that you got to see the Fellowship at various points in their journey as you're zooming around the world on fast travel horses and they're just like having to walk, you know. You get to see them at different points in their journey. You get to see the effect that they leave on the world, and you get to join or work against the factions that they are influenced by, or you know, or who are working against them. So that was like, it was a real issue that you have to solve, and there isn't obviously a one-size-fits-all solution, but in general, the more players feel like they can change the world, like 80 Days, there's a certain amount of player agency there, even though it's just a little like 2D art, not much animation. You know, there's a replayability there because you want to see how you are going to change the story differently as you go through.
But could you play as a wizard in LOTRO?
You could play as a lore master, which was wizardish,
That's
but not a
close
wizard.
enough. That's close enough.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
How do you stop yourself from overpaying?
Oh God, good question. Like in any world building or any sort of setting, it is really important that you understand everything. So go ahead and write all the documents, go ahead and flesh out those backstories, make it really clear for you and also for, preferably, if you've documented it decently, your fellow devs. You know, an artist who is interested in like really adding some little details should be able to go to your documentation and really understand how that character felt about their father and why they dress like this and why they don't, you know. But restraining yourself, like I said, writing is mostly editing, and that is not just, you know, the written word on the page. That is what the story you choose to tell. A lot of it, I find the most useful way to look at it is the same way that I would look at how do I prep a talk, how do I prep a presentation, and that is, okay, who am I talking to, and what questions might they have? And if you start from there, if you start from, okay, I'm the player, I'm interacting with this world, and I am this class or that class, you know, if it's a multi-class system, or I'm this character or that character. If I encounter another character, what do I need to know? What's going to help me? Do I need to know that they are good with weapons? And if so, is Y nice to have, or just totally unnecessary? Do I just need to know that they're good with weapons? That's really where you start, I think, in terms of like deciding what you are going to tell the player. And in general, start with too little. Edit it down to the bare bones and be like, can I tell the story with like very, very minimal detail? It is always easier, especially when you're in the early parts of a project and you're brainstorming and that sort of thing. It's easier to put story in. I'm sure you've probably heard this quote, but Oscar Wilde wrote a friend of his and said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. It is a lot harder to write short, concise, clean text than it is to just and throw up on a page. You know, in the same way, there's a real tendency to want to share all the things you know about this character and all of the things that you know about the political system of the country they came from, and like, and here I've got, you know, the entire genealogy of kings, and it's like nobody cares.
But it's lore.
What?
But it's lore in the story. It adds to the story, no?
And lore. So I am a huge fan of lore that is available to players, but not necessary. So like codexes, civilopedias, indexes, appendices, website text, you know, extra content. Yes, give me all the extra content, but
Exactly.
I'm the sort of person who likes to read, and that is not most people.
Oh.
That's the thing, is that you cannot depend on players playing a game the way you would in any kind of game design as well as narrative design. You know, you cannot depend on players having the same connections to different characters
But
that you would.
like to make a world complete, don't you need all these to make a world more living, more breathing?
Like I said, it is important for you to know this. You should document it. You should have it clear in your head. You should be able to explain it to anybody who comes along and says, what's the history of this? Well, let me tell you about the history of this. You should be able to do that. What you tell to the players is a totally different thing. Plus, the more you hold back at the beginning, the more you can trickle out in dribs and drabs and let them know. One resource that I find extremely useful as a game designer as well as a narrative designer is people who run tabletop games, D&D, you know, your Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeon Masters, and people who run LARPs, because they are used to having to think about things in terms of a campaign-length story. We are going to be sitting down at this table every Tuesday and playing in the same world with these same characters for a year or 2 years. And they need to be able to react quickly to player input, you know, and decisions. It's like, wait, you talked to him now? Okay, I'm gonna have to redo everything, you know, that sort of thing. But they have a lot of really good advice and really good lessons to teach when it comes to how much do you tell players? Who tells them? Why are they telling them that? Those are the questions you also need to be able to answer. Not just like, you know, there's a term in script writing called the California overshare. Ever heard of this? This is a thing that was like, it's bad exposition, and it was done, it's gone out of fashion now, thank God, but it's the sort of thing of, if you've ever had to go to LA, I have to go there every once in a while because a lot of the voice actors are there and you have to direct them there. But if you ever go to LA or Southern California, you like meet somebody in line at a grocery store and they're like, so my aunt is really sick and my poodle has like dysentery, you know, and they're giving you all of these details about like personal, uncomfortably personal details about their lives on minute one of meeting you. You know, it's like, hi, nice to meet you. Like, I have problems with my mother, you know? And that's the California overshare. And it was a thing that was seen in a lot of TV shows and things where it's like, why would somebody tell a stranger this? If it doesn't make sense for you to go up to a random stranger on the street and give them this exposition, it's gonna sound weird when your character does it in game. So if they just blurt out all of the information, even if it's all the information that is good and important for the players to know, if they do that right away, that's very much like, hail and well met, traveler. I see that the king has, it's the sort of, you know, it's the sort of dialogue that we make fun of in older games because they were written by non-writers. They were written by game designers who weren't really paying much attention to the narrative and who were just saying, we need a reason for them to go to the kingdom because they need to kill an orc because I made this fight really cool, you know? And so they've gone back from that. Anyway, little ramble there, but yeah. Any other questions? Sure.
I was just wondering, how important and how do you know when to do more subtle narrative towards like more dialogue based and more like upfront narrative?
Again, so genre, project, you know, there's no one size fits all. However, in general, players we love them to death, but they're never as smart as we think they are. We know all the details. We have this story in our heads, and we're pretty clear on why things happen, and we want to sprinkle little hints, and very rarely do players pick up on them. In general, again, it depends on the game. If you're making like a moody, atmospheric, slow thriller or horror movie, horror game, you know, that sort of thing, and you're really looking for a mystery and a slow build, but it's mostly about like the spookiness and it's a walking sim or something like that, you're going to be able to be more subtle. The vast majority of games, players do not see things that you think are so obvious. Like, you're just like, I hit them upside the head with this and I didn't notice. They will not notice. There are always going to be some like intense fans who are going to go through your game with a fine-tooth comb, but that's going to be like 0.001% of your player base. In general, not every game, hashtag not all games, but like, be less subtle than you think you have to be. It's easy to, so that's the sort of thing that you could test, you know, and be like, okay, I've got A/B testing. Here is where it's like quite subtle, and I've got these 4 details, and then the other ones that don't come up until much later in the game. And this version, I have in place of those 4 details, I have the ones that come up later in the game, and I'm just going to show them right off. See if that works, kind of thing. But again, you haven't changed the main principles of the game. You haven't changed the main elements of it. The narrative is still locked down, but you can absolutely pull levers and figure out what is going to tell your story best, most efficiently for your genre and for your gameplay experience. And for your players.
What kind of skills or kind of personality traits should you have as a narrative designer? Like, what should we nurture if you want to be?
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of crossover with game designer skills. So the ability to talk to people, and the ability to sell your idea, the ability to clearly communicate your idea, written and in person, written and verbally, those are non-negotiable, really. If you cannot. Yeah, if you can't sell the story to an artist well enough that they get excited about the artistic possibilities and that they put their best work into it, then you're not going to be able to sell it to a player. With that said, like I said, narrative design is so cross-functional that honestly anything you are good at, do more of that and put it into the game. You need, you need decent game design chops. You need to understand how systems work to create a player experience. You know, you need to realize why some combat feels good and why some doesn't. But you also need to listen to, again, consume games critically and listen to why this dialogue is really effective. And that one, you're like, all the words are right, but it left me really flat. Okay, is it the performance? Maybe the actor's really good. You listen to other stuff they did. Maybe it's the directing. Why would that directing, why did that feel like it sort of hamstrung the actor? Or is it the script? Like, are they doing their best with a really shitty script? This sort of thing. So, in general, love of stories, including a love of words preferably, but love of stories, thinking about story structure, your classic sort of read up on the very basics of it. The good news is you don't have to be like a specialist. You don't have to, as long as you know sort of what is the hero's journey and what is 3-act structure and the very, very, very basics of storytelling. And you can teach yourself those with YouTube. Like, read watch, ask. There's plenty of resources out there. So basic storytelling chops. Decent grammar and spelling, doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be reasonably good. Solid design skills. Decent technical writing in terms of like being able to make a coherent game design document, edit it. And then any technical skills you can bring to the table, dear God, punch hard on that button, it will make you so much more employable.
Should exposition be avoided? Because I hear this a lot. And they say it's lazy writing. I didn't want to say that word really, but...
Sometimes it would be, yeah, so exposition and lazy writing are the things that happen when people who are not writers have to write. And that's usually game designers. It's like, you are the one with the best spelling, you're stuck doing the writing. You know, I would say that actually it just goes back to one of the very basic storytelling principles, which is show, don't tell. If you have to tell me, and it's like telling a good joke. If you have to explain the joke, it's not well told and possibly not a very good joke. If you have to give me exposition to make me care about the character, instead of having me care about the character because I've played with them for a little while and they're like really cool or really fast or really agile or really smart or magic users or whatever, like that's why I should care about the character.
But exposition enforces the idea that the image gives. Let's say someone dies and it's not so sure, but if a character comes and tells you that this character died, it's clear exposition. But
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you should never have a character give any exposition. It's just like, why do we have to storm the castle? I'm not telling you. If you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. You know, like that's not helpful. But the kind of exposition that people react negatively to is usually the kind of like, hear ye, here is a minute and a half of like the genealogy of this kingdom and therefore why we are against the prince. Don't really care. You know, or maybe I do care and I can go and look it up in the books in Skyrim or in the Civilopedia in Civ or whatever. You know, there's as long as people can find out the information if they want it, then give them only as much as they need to survive. You know, give them only as much as they need to succeed as a player.
How do you format sort of say an open world sort of script with different options? How does that look?
You just like opened a huge can of worms. that is something that's up for debate with a lot of people because the problem is there's very little industry standard software. First of all, there is even less industry standard software that deals with narrative problems, which is why the rise of Inkle or and Twine and that sort of thing has been trying to solve this problem. And they're pretty good for like kind of standard branching stuff, but it all gets a bit choose your own adventure. Sooner or later, much like every other designer, my paintbrush is Excel. That's where we do our work. And how you organize it is kind of up to you. In an ideal world, there is a subsection of the editor or a tool within the editor that, even better, if you have either coded it yourself because you're awesome and you have coding skills that I don't, or talked a tools person into making for you or tweaking for you or optimizing for you. In an ideal world, you'd have like a subsection of the editor that basically has all the levers you can pull. It's like, yeah, here's the script, here's the notes for the translators and the localization, you know, code and the file names and all of the rest of the thing, and you can press a button and hear that if you've recorded the script, but it also links to every character it, you know, who could say it or that it mentions, every quest that it comes up in, every, you know, like, unfortunately, that's a thing that kind of requires bespoke solutions and there is no standard thing. Everybody just kind of does the best they can. I'm hoping it's getting better as life goes on, but I'm currently having to work with a database tool called Speakeasy that I just want to like turn into a frisbee and fly it to the moon because it's the worst. But yeah, how are we for time?
Okay, guys, any last two questions?
What do you think of the hero's journey? Do you think it's a bit overused, or what's your opinion?
I mean, it has been for 3,000 years, so yes, but also very much no. Sooner or later, all models are wrong, some models are useful. Tropes, if you ever go to tvtropes.com, right, that is it's a delicious click trance you can enter for 4 hours and just be like, people have codified all of the, you know, the common tropes that are used in TV and movies and games and all the rest of it, and books, but the hero journey is like the big one, it's one of the big tropes. It works best when it's honest, it works best when you care about the hero and you don't see things coming a mile away, even if you are aware of the hero's journey. It works well when subverted or parodied, or everybody makes the assumption that okay, they're going to meet a mentor and then the mentor's probably going to die and leave them in charge of the blah and this sort of thing. That's very classic hero's journey. And if you're expecting that and then you twist it a little bit, then that can be a really nice surprise, but you have to know the rules before you can break them well. You can always break a rule by accident, but if you want to break it with intentionality, then you do have to know it a little bit. So yeah, is the hero's journey overused? Good God, yes. But also, don't we all kind of want to be heroes? Isn't that why we play games a lot? Not every game, but we kind of want to go through that journey. We kind of want to come into our power and have somebody who's actually guiding us and telling us what to do in this world, and then also dying off and leaving us alone to do things the way we see best, etc., etc. So yeah.
One last question.
I wanted to ask, I read a really interesting article about how stories in games are more like architecture and less like TV or films. And I was wondering, what is your opinion on writing stories that can be potentially missed?
Is it players might not encounter that story at all?
Might not encounter it, creating these details that and not just a codex, but maybe an entire scene that happens at a certain time. Or quest chain.
Okay, so I would again, it depends on the genre and the project and all the rest of it, but with the expectation that, okay, there's plenty of games where you do miss content. Again, Skyrim, boy, is that the big one, it's got so much. However, a lot of it is about, okay, so if there's content that people can miss, then I would suggest that it was done for a game that is replayable. It will make your content more viral, for one thing. People are going to want to stream it and then watch other people stream it and see what different experience they have. People are going to want to replay the game to see what kind of different experiences they can have. So if it's a big game, then content you miss is actually a feature, not a bug.
But the specifics I wanted to ask is games that, Skyrim, there is this one cave that you may meet a bleeding man, but it doesn't matter if you meet him at the start or at the end of your playthrough, he will still be there. I'm more talking about games that would cut that out, or you would go there and he would have bled
you
out
missed that
already.
It left without you. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I would say that if it's a game that has any replayability, that's an awesome thing. Actually, that's put in as much content as you can afford. If it's a curated experience and a player is missing a fairly big chunk of your game, that might be down to your level design. That might be down to that might be a bug. That might be something that you want to fix. If it's a question of I kind of want to read this article now because I'm gonna go Google it. But that's a really good way of putting it. Is that good game narrative is not a linear story that you tell to a passive audience. It is a building that players walk through. It is something that they can interact with as they like on their own timeline, and that they can sort of make their own, in the same way that anybody who walks into a building has different associations and is experiencing different feelings about it than the person they're right next to walking through it at the same time, because we all have different relationships with architecture.
So can you realistically write good dialogue that allows the player to jump in at any point?
So that is also another can of worms, but a lot of it is about how, sooner or later it's about how the player's character is reacting to that character and what their relationship is. In an ideal world, so one of the things that Skyrim does very poorly, for example, is that because they have a standard set of lines that are delivered whenever you talk to this person and want to buy from their shop, and they're like, so you're an alchemist then? And it's bitch, I have bought 17 levels of alchemy training from you. I've been in this shop 700 times. Are you kidding me? That is immersion breaking, and that is non really sort of optimal experience-wise. So being able to have a character react, even if it's in small cosmetic ways, that whole thing of hello Archmage, is going to make a big difference. And there are a lot of ways that you can kind of hide the fact that this is quite standard experience and this is quite linear, because sooner or later we are constrained by our tools, and a lot of our stories are linear-ish, whether or not we want them to be. So yeah, that's something that has to be solved kind of on a project by project basis. I think it is possible. I think nobody has yet figured it out properly.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. Everybody?
And yeah, if you have any other questions that you didn't think of, I'm always on the Twitter machines, pretty much. So yeah, do find me on there and ask there.
Right, okay guys, back to normality, back to our usual world. Sorry, not normality, I don't know what to say that. Games, let's get next door, let's get our laptops out, let's get our games up and running, let's start playing each other's games. Yep, good, right on.